I'm sure there's better things you could be doing. Huh.
It's been over 25 years since Kazuki Takahashi, Hiroki bless his soul, accidentally introduced the blight that is Yu-Gi-Oh! To this world. And while the game may have had humble beginnings, mixed with a few localization mishaps, one can't deny that the amping up of can't-read memes, expensive deck cores, piss-poor tournament prize cards, and general card design is beginning to feel less like a balanced game, and more like a headache Konami is trying to alleviate by whatever means necessary. That's why today we're asking the question, what's the deal with these OG retrains? Amidst the strings of crappy cards and outright busted new archetypes, the game harkens back to one latent ideal. How can we rehash Dark Magician for the millionth time? And by Jove, they've done it again, although I'd at least argue that the way they've done it again is at least not as much of a clusterfuck, and instead is a very nice way of calling back to its manga origins. It's a bit of a kick Konami has been on lately, and while I would appreciate a new anime that can give us new archetypes without them having Tolkien levels of lore behind them, I do always like when they return to old cards and give them some love. We've been seeing it a lot lately, with the Yubel support being pretty chief among them due to how incoherent the original Yubel playstyle was. Nothing can be truer than the sheer level of incompatibility that DM characters' decks had in those earlier days, which is why I really enjoyed that brief stint of time in Master Duel when they were making modern-esque decks of anime duels. Except Merrick's new Raw deck. Fuck that Raw deck very much. When it comes to making more modern versions of characters' decks, there can be problems. Some characters, like Nash and to an extent Meiko Tsunami before him, are easy. Generic water with some overall themes, especially in the case of Nash, who had access to Water Xyz, which had some decent and meta-relevant heavy hitters. Then you get characters who had many different themes to their decks that are now rendered impossible to actually use together because of each of these themes now having their own dedicated archetype. A lot of this being Yugi, to be honest. You have some archetypes which are more like engines, like Poker Knights and Magnet Warriors. Then you have the big ones. Dark Magician, BLS, Gaia, which for all intents and purposes is a sub-archetype of BLS, Chimera, alongside all those illusion-type monsters. These decks are all far too different from each other to be effectively useful, and also way too big to work together without massive playability issues. That's why their most recent way to modernize Yugi's playstyle is, honestly, probably the best way to add a deck gimmick without overshadowing the cards it references. It centers around a card called Shining Sarcophagus, which, while I liked the original translation of Gold Sarcophagus of Light better, is a far better way to tie them together than risk making a deck called Ceremonial. It's a continuous spell that cannot be destroyed by monster effects, and it can add one card from your deck to your hand per turn that mentions it by name, and if your opponent special summons a monster from the graveyard, you can send that shit right back by pitching a spell from your hand. It's a retrain of Gold Sarcophagus, as you may have guessed, and I appreciate the ways it both calls back to its origins while still being a series-locked better Gold Sarc. It nets you the card you search right away instead of banishing it for 2 turns, but only cards that tie directly to the deck theme, and it can also be used to tell Slifer to fuck off. At the time of this writing, the majority of the cards involved are directly based on monsters used by Yugi during his duel with Atem, plus Dark Magician, but if you honestly expected them to not make a new DM for the new Yugi deck, then you really need to go home and rethink your life. Let's cover that Dark Magician retrain, which is currently called Dark Magician the Iban Sorcerer, or more hilariously, Dark Magician in the OCG. Yes, I'm familiar with the difference between Majutsushi and Magician. It doesn't make the bare bones translation any less funny though. It's got all the stats you expect from a Dark Magician retrain and becomes Dark Magician while in the monster zone. When Shining Sarcophagus is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is destroyed by an effect while a level 5 or higher monster is on the field, you can special summon it back to the field, then set one spell or trap that mentions Dark Magician directly from your deck. Sure, it removes some of the surprise of setting cards, but I honestly find it pretty neat that if the deck is performing the way it should be, you don't need to run multiple copies of Dark Magician to effectively utilize some of the support cards for it, with some pretty great ones being Dark Magic Attack and Dark Burning Magic if you can get a Dark Magician Girl on the field. Looking forward to Dark Magician Girl the Abana Apprentice at some point. Hopefully her effect isn't as fucked as Palladium or Clamana's was. Moving on from there, we have the other higher level retrains. Geese Gandora, Gandora G, the Dragon of Destruction, can be special summoned if you control a Shining Sarcophagus, gains 300 attack for each banished card, and at the cost of half your life points, you can nuke the rest of the field and banish them, then special summon a level 7 or lower monster that mentions Shining Sarcophagus, and increase its level by the number of cards destroyed. The banish facilitates Gandora G's attack gain, and while the second effect feels strange at first, in case you've forgotten, Yugi liked using monsters that got stronger each time they gained levels, and this card can summon both of them. I'm just not big on the name translation. What, was Gandora X supposed to be Extreme Gandora or something? Ah, it was Gandora Cross. Of course it was. Archfiend's Arrival, which is a brilliant name that essentially means the same thing as Summon Skull, is the other retrain. Unlike the previous two, it can't be special summoned if you control Shining Sarcophagus, but it can be summoned without tributes, which is better than nothing, I guess. When it's summoned, it essentially becomes Change of Heart, but the monster you steal can't attack if you did not control Shining Sarcophagus on activation. Also, during your turn, other monsters you control gain 500 attack, which is... yeah, I have no idea. My best guess for these effects is that Summon Skull's flavor text mentions using dark powers to confuse the enemy, which I suppose could be like brainwashing. And as for the attack gain effect, I have a theory. In episode 57, Yugi takes out the Rare Hunter by attacking directly with Alpha the Magnet Warrior, which had its attack boosted by Summon Skull's attack by being on the field together. The thing is, the Rare Hunter had a full 4,000 life points, and Alpha and Summon Skull's attack together only equals 3,900, so Alpha inexplicably gained additional attack to seal the deal. This increase is never referenced by name, nor does it ever happen again. That's genuinely the best explanation I can come up with for this extra effect, and even then I have no concrete idea why it's there. In addition to these monsters, there's also some lower level retrains. More Marshmallon has the same battle indestructibility plus a built-in Marshmallon glasses when you control Shining Sarcophagus, which is a little annoying, but features the same special summon other monsters have when you control the spell, and when it's destroyed by card effect, you can special summon another More Marshmallon from literally anywhere it could legally be, including your banishment, then hits the opponent for that classic 1000 Marshmallon burn. It's like Marshmallon, but more Marshmallon. Yeah? Okay, moving on. While it's annoying that it only gains the effect Marshmallon was known for while Shining Sarcophagus is on the field, one thing I do really like about these cards so far is that they're nice enough to not eat up your normal summon, which means you can still go into your heavier hitters while still allowing for some recursion in their own right. These heavy hitters can include Archfiend's Arrival, but it can, more importantly, include cards like Silent Swordsman 0 and Silent Magician 0. They're both retrains of their anime level 0 counterparts, with Silent Magician gaining a level for each card your opponent draws, subsequently gaining 500 attack, with Silent Magician doing the same thing during each standby phase. Unlike their anime appearances, and more like their existing real-life counterparts, they each have some unique effects. Magician can, once per turn, negate an opponent's spell activation if you control Shining Sarcophagus, and then gains 1 level for the trouble. Swordsman, meanwhile, can negate a card or effect activated by an opponent that targets either Shining Sarcophagus or a monster that mentions it, and again gains a level in the process. I'm not the biggest fan of Magician only working on spells, and Swordsman having a limit on what it can protect, but these cards certainly work more in line for both the deck and with modern Yu-Gi-Oh's slowly dying use of trap cards. Also, they provide boosts to their own level effects, which are admittedly pretty strong, especially in the case of Swordsman who gains 1000 attack between each of your main phase 1s. The last monster on the docket for now is Gadget Trio. When summoned, it can search not only Shining Sarcophagus, but also any other spell or trap that mentions it, which is all of the other support cards. When it's destroyed, you can then set a Stronghold the Hidden Fortress from your deck. Not really hidden anymore since it was set by an effect, but we'll look at Stronghold in a moment. For spells, we start with the Silent Magician and Swordsman-esque cards, beginning with Future Silence. It's a quick play that lets you search any monster from your deck that mentions Shining Sarcophagus, and if the effect is used during the battle phase while you control both Shining Sarcophagus and a monster that mentions it, both players draw until they have 6 cards in their hand. That's a pretty steep secondary there, because typically you don't want to give your opponent a bunch of extra consistency for free, but in a more casual game, this is probably the closest you can get to Anime Card of Sanctity. Also, it completely screws Infernity players over, and if your opponent had nothing in their hand, your Silent Magician just gained a charitable 3000 attack. Besides, if you don't use it during the battle phase, it still gets the search off, so you're still adding some consistency. Turn Silence is the other quick play spell in this vein. It lets you target and increase the level of a face-up monster you control by 3, and if it was used in response to an opponent's monster effect activation while you controlled Shining Sarcophagus and a monster that mentions it, you can negate that effect. It can also act as a negate attack if your monster that mentions Shining Sarcophagus battles by banishing it from your graveyard. While Future Silence has the biggest potential reward, I don't feel the ends justify the means when using it during the battle phase, unless you're confident you're winning then and there. In contrast, Turn Silence can only give your Swordsman or Magician 1500 attack, but it applies to both and is guaranteed, and seeing as how you probably have both required cards on the field, it can also add some extra negation if Swordsman can't use its effect anymore, or if you want to save it for a potentially bigger threat. The only other spell card is Ties of Friendship. It lets you summon 2 level 4 or lower monsters from your hand or deck if you control Shining Sarcophagus and a monster that mentions it, which I really appreciate, but not the extra deck lockout, which means you aren't getting to play any of your extra deck toolbox cards. You could drop this to get Silent Swordsman or Magician out, although if that was your play you'd be better off to put down 2 of something else and get Gandora G out on the field to tear out a new one. Visuals, 10 out of 10. Playability, more like a 6 out of 10. We finally come to the traps, starting with Dark Magic Mirror Force. It can be used in response to an opponent's attack or monster effect activation when you control a monster that mentions Shining Sarcophagus, and it not only provides a blanket once per turn protection on every such monster you control this turn, it also blows up all attack position monsters your opponent controls, and hits them for 500 each if Dark Magician is on the field, which means that this is the in-archetype target for a Bond Sorcerer's effect. I like it in the deck because it basically is just Mirror Force, but it also works on effects. The way the deck is structured, you'll likely have a monster that mentions Shining Sarcophagus on board at all times, and unlike all other support cards so far, you don't even need to control the titular card this time. The protection from both battle and effect destruction once per turn is nice, and I always appreciate when a card with random burn does something else first and foremost. Lastly is Stronghold the Hidden Fortress. It's, as trap monsters tend to be, a continuous trap, initially starting with the same stats as the original Stronghold. Unlike Ancient Gear Golem's Decrepit Ancestor though, it gains a flat 1000 attack for each Shining Sarcophagus or monster you control that mentions it on the field, giving it a potential maximum of 8000 attack because it also applies to itself. And it's also a walking Sakuretsu armor once per turn if you control Shining Sarcophagus. Overall, I really like what they've done here. I kind of feel like unique gimmicks are fading from the game in a way they tended to work in the anime. And while Shining Sarcophagus is by no means unique, it's a much better implementation of focusing on a single spell than a deck like Kawaki Meiru was, where their central spell was only good for skipping the draw phase to put it back in your hand. I miss when they had cards using special gimmicks, so it's always nice to see when a new series of cards come out that have one. Will Shining Sarcophagus win any worlds anytime soon? Probably not, but decks that are fun to play are at least very appreciated from a casual player's viewpoint. This isn't even the only one to get a fun gimmick, although the other one is more like an engine for an Exodia deck, that being the new Millennium cards. Anyway, I haven't done an actual proper review of an archetype since way back in 2021 when I reviewed the Utopia archetype, so why the hell not? Let's bring up that scorecard here for Shining Sarcophagus and... Did you guys see that too? Whoa. What the hell? What's going on? Okay, I guess almost 3 years of neglect made it short out. Serves me right for picking it up from the Duel Masters Club, I guess. I'll be right back.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
Alrighty, I'm back, and with my new and improved score sheet. My new rating system may look more simplified, but I assure you it is more than that. We'll be reviewing these decks on some new criteria, which are playability, strength, and recovery. Yeah, there's kind of no way I can not include this metric, and basically every synonym of recovery would be better condensed with the word recovery, so there we go. Also, playability is just consistency and versatility boiled down into one score, and strength is power and protection, because frankly these metrics are still very valid methods of measuring a deck's quality. I've just decided to condense them down into a single score for each pair, as they're often directly tied together. These scores are also going to be double weighted, meaning I'm looking not only at the amount it has, which will be denounced by the number of stars it has, but also the quality, which will be shown in the color of the stars. Please like it, I worked so hard on this. When it comes to Shining Sarcophagus, the playability is certainly up there due to its consistency. The deck has quite a few consistent ways to get access to other cards in the deck, owed in no small part to cards like Trio, Future Silence, and Shining Sarcophagus itself. Ties of Friendship is also a bit helpful here as well, but not as much for consistency as it's more for stacking the field. It does lose points however because it's locked pretty heavily into Shining Sarcophagus specifically. Because so many of the cards rely heavily on either having Shining Sarcophagus on board, or a monster that mentions it, or both, it's pretty hard to squeeze it into another deck and would be forced to be the star of the show. Not that that's a bad thing or anything, I love this collection of cards, but it definitely drags the playability down, so I'm only going to give it 3 stars. However, while it may not have much in the way of versatility, the quality of the consistency is quite good. Running 3 Trio nets you the entire back row, Shining Sarcophagus can add any card to the hand once per turn, and Future Silence can handily draw you up to 6 cards from your deck just by using it during the battle phase. Granted, this also lets your opponent draw until they have 6 cards in their hand, which definitely knocks the quality down, but I think what's on display here overshadows the poor versatility and warrants a grade of 4. Strength is also there. There are 3 high-level, relatively high-attack monsters that can be summoned easily, 2 by special summon and 1 by normal summoning without tributing, all by controlling the central spell card. Not only that, but the silent monsters have the potential to get pretty stacked with attack, made even easier by turn silence to boost their levels further, and Stronghold gets beefier the more you control. They're also very capable of defending themselves with multiple negates available, a walking Sakuretsu armor, a personal mirror force that also hits monster effect usage, and putting out 2 more Marshmallons while Shining Sarcophagus is out means your opponent needs to get rid of them by other means before they can attack. It's not perfect though, because the protection largely lives and dies with Sarcophagus, so all told I'm pretty confident in giving it 4 stars. As for the quality, well, let's look at the numbers. Both Yvonne Sorcerer and Archfiend's Arrival have 2500 attack, but Archfiend gives all other monsters you control an extra 500. Stronghold can have upwards of 8000 attack, Gandora G evaporates the whole field and then gives you the chance to put a silent monster on board for a massive attack gain, all while sticking around permanently, unlike its namesake. Turn Silence can also net a silent monster 1500 extra attack, which is no small deal for a pair of level 4 monsters, and if we want to be technical, Future Silence could potentially net Magician 3000 attack as well. Its defense is a different story. The negation is split between targeting effect protection and spell protection specifically, which isn't great, and you need to protect that Sarcophagus from spell and trap effects like your life depended on it, which is also not a great sign. The best the deck has going for it for protection is the more Marshmallon defense. Definitely only getting a grade of 3 here. As for the recovery, it's not great overall. Yvonne Sorcerer can put itself back on the board whether you have Shining Sarcophagus or not, but it also requires a level 5 or higher monster on the field, and in the middle of a board wipe that means your opponent needs to be the one controlling it, and they could just as easily be controlling monsters with no levels. More Marshmallon can recover itself after an effect destruction whether you have Sarcophagus or not, plus a 1000 burn, but without Sarcophagus on the field it's just a pink target. The only other card is Ties of Friendship, but this requires you to have both Sarcophagus and a monster that mentions it on board, so you'd already have to be working on recovering to make that work, and that seems really situational at best. Given the amounts of it that rely on the field not being completely fucked, I can only give this 1 star, but provided everything works out, the recovery is somewhat serviceable, letting you get a Dark Magician support card and getting some extra monsters on the board. With that, I feel alright giving this a grade of 2. This is by no means a complete deck, partly why I didn't bother giving any recommendations for deck lists or anything. We have no way of knowing if they'll add more cards to this playstyle in the future. They could do things like that DMG retrain I joked about, Magnet Warrior retrains, Buster Blader, hell even more classic Yugi cards are potentially fair game, so we'll just have to wait and see. And with that concludes this mini review of Yugi's new cards, although this wound up being a lot more like an Archetype review than anything else. I've got a new episode of Weighing the Dragons coming out soon, and I'm going to try and be a bit more on top of putting those out so I can work on some later projects, so look forward to that. Anyway, I'm Matt, and I'll see you next time.